Throughout history, humanity has had a bit of a habit of devising ever-increasingly demonic ways to torture its citizens and ultimately end their lives in the most painful and excruciating ways possible. Particularly throughout the medieval period of Europe, torture devices boomed in frequency as mad kings and evil seneschals alike delved deep into the pits of dark human ingenuity, bolstering their arsenals with racks, spikes, traps, brazen bulls, rats in buckets, and anything else that they could conjure up from the creation of their nightmarish minds. Perhaps one of the most terrifying of these contraptions is the infamous Iron Maiden, and as is always the case, the SCP Foundation have one particular entry that may change the way you look at the ultimate goal of medieval torture. Hello internet, what's going on? And once again, welcome back to the most inquisitive channel on YouTube, Life's Biggest Questions. As per usual, I'll be your disembodied floating voice, Jack Finch, as today we curiously ask the question, what if SCP-762 was real? Roll the clip. Wait. Do we have a clip of 15th century torture devices? Oh, yeah, that one. I forgot about that. Funny, aren't I? For the curious amongst you, that clip was, of course, from Tim Burton's 1999 gothic classic Sleepy Hollow, because, well, it's pretty difficult to find any kind of cinematic depiction of an Iron Maiden, as you'd imagine, really. Also, that film is surprisingly awesome, and any chance I get at showing Ichabod Crane being a weird gothic badass, I will. That's all there is to it, really. And you may be asking, what the hell, Jack? What are you talking about? Iron Maiden? Aren't they one of the greatest British heavy metal bands ever formed? Well, yes. Of course they are, but no. Not that Iron Maiden, because let me introduce you to SCP-762, which despite being only a brief entry into the Foundation's containment and one of the earliest entries in the Foundation's history, there's actually quite a bit more to this particular anomalous device than first meets the eye. First though, let's set the scene. As the record states, SCP-762 is a torture device similar to the infamous Iron Maiden of Nuremberg. For those of you that don't know, this particular contraption was a particularly gruesome execution device, even for medieval Europe standards, that consisted of an iron cabinet with a hinged front, adorned with a metal spiked covered interior, sufficiently tall enough to enclose an adult human being inside. It's also important to note that whilst the first grim stories involving the use of the Iron Maiden as a torture method were first composed sometime in the 19th century, the use of this device in particular is widely considered to be a myth from the century before that was heightened by the belief that the people of the Middle Ages were barbaric, violent, and uncivilized, which in most cases they were, but as far as the Iron Maiden is concerned, it's kind of like a nasty rumor in high school that got way out of hand. However, in this hypothetical situation, there may be a much more anomalous explanation for the Iron Maiden's murky origins. SCP-762 was first recovered sometime in the early 20th century from a box found in the basement of a wealthy benefactor in the mountainous regions of Austria. For the most part, SCP-762 is classified as a safe object, and so its containment procedures are relatively straightforward, as it is currently housed inside a storage crate at an undisclosed Foundation site. As SCP-762 does not appear to be dangerous to anyone unless they're placed inside of it, no further precautions are required, and Foundation staff are free to experiment with the anomalous object, although they must be given prior authorization by Dr. Wright, a particular Foundation researcher and analyst that specializes in the more bizarre and the macabre aspects of the Foundation's work. You see, it's not necessarily because of the device itself, but instead what was found inside. After first being contained by the Foundation, when opened, 762 was found to have a male human inside, now referred to as SCP-762-2. When he was first discovered inside, the unknown male had a number of the device's large spikes violently embedded in his flesh in a gory mass, but once he was removed from the device, suddenly and instantly all of his wounds had healed. Other than being completely catatonic, the man was found to be in decent health, save for several rotten teeth and a large scar on his left arm. Now, is that small detail incredibly important to this hypothetical situation? Well, it could be, because whoever this strange anomalous man was would have played a large part in the reason he was encased inside the Iron Maiden. You see, given his unique properties, the Foundation deemed it impossible to determine how long 762-2 was in the device, but research has shown that it dates back to at least the 15th century, and it's entirely possible that the man may have been in the device for centuries before being discovered. As the the Foundation subsequently discovered, any person that is placed inside the Iron Maiden object of SCP-762 appears to enter a state of suspended animation. Subjects no longer need food, water, or even air when inside the contraption, and also appear to be immune to any effects of disease, injury, or even aging. Yeah, you know where this is going, right? The real question isn't why are people being placed inside an immortal macabre torture device that keeps them alive forever. It's what kind of people would need to be imprisoned inside an immortal macabre torture device that keeps them alive forever. You see, the interesting thing that SCP-762 addresses is that historically in the real world, these devices were never actually used as a method of torture. In fact, for the most part, the infamous Iron Maiden of legend was more of a grim, dark, yet stylish piece of furniture for wealthier collectors throughout 18th century Europe that had a fascination with the darker side of human ingenuity, as far as we know. Anyway, like many things, the machinations of SCP-762 seem to conflict with the historical description of this particular anomalous object, but it is food for thought, right? If this object did indeed exist, perhaps at the hands of an evil, ingenious king or someone of a similar ilk, would they have paid the painful price to be immortalized, encased in the confines of 762, waiting patiently to be discovered by modern civilization, where they could seemingly be resurrected right now in 2019, where presumably they'd unleash an ancient malevolent curse and bring ruin to our fair planet? Just kidding, but that's how these things usually end, right? The fact of the matter is, cryoengineering and suspended animation has long been a hypothetical concept only ever addressed in the confines of science fiction. But if we flip that precedent and imagine the vast wealth of anomalous antiques, black market, cursed objects, and other such devices similar to 762 that may or may not already exist on the market, the reversal of these immortal implications offer a strange perspective as to the price of eternal life. Hypothetically speaking, if you were some wealthy baron in medieval Europe and someone offered you the chance at immortality and all it involved was stepping inside his iron, spike-filled contraption, would you do it? I mean, I don't want to be the first one to find out. Put it that way. The SCP won't let me be, but as far as that parroting goes, you know how it is over here at LifesBiggestQuestions, guys. We've got quite the soft spot for that terrifying fictional organization known only as the SCP Foundation for one very important reason. Here, by means of the hypothetical machine that we employ on a daily video upload basis, we enjoy nothing more than simulating our imaginations and seeing just what the hell would happen if X equals Y and we divide the universe by 0. And thankfully for us, the SCP Foundation has a myriad of content for us to build that terrifying scaffolding around. But have you ever wondered which of them is the worst of the worst? Well, let's find out. Today we curiously ask the question, what SCP Foundation creatures should we never let loose? Roll the clip.
I'm sorry I let you get attacked by a werewolf and then into the world.
For the curious amongst you, that clip was from 2012's Cabin in the Woods, because let's face it, as some of you may have already noticed, that movie in particular is perhaps one of the best hypothetical visual depictions of the SCP Foundation, especially when things get really insane in the latter half, but I'm saying nothing. And also, the end of the world is probably a pretty apt framing device, because as we shall soon find out, essentially every scenario from here on out would likely spell the end of the human race and the likely annihilation of our civilization. But hey, that goes without saying over here at LBQ, and that's also why you're here, right guys? Right? Before we jump into this whole debacle though, guys, you know the ground rules. It's probably best that we first outline just exactly what the hell is going on for those of you that aren't too familiar with the innermost complexities of the SCP Foundation. And also, if you're on an even lower rung of the knowledge ladder and have no idea what it is in the first place, this is probably not the video for you, and I would commend you to instead take a look at our numerous SCP-based videos as a jumping off point. Really, take your pick. There is quite a few of them. To cut a long story short, the SCP Foundation is a fictional global organization that spans not only continents the planet over, but also a myriad of alternate realities, solar systems, and in some cases, all of time and space, really. The purpose of this organization is to seek out and contain the many anomalous horrors and creatures that go bump in the night, and now their influence contains literally thousands upon thousands of anomalous creatures, items, and objects. And this is where we chime in to see which would be the worst of the worst. The thing is though, it's important to clarify just exactly what we're dealing with, because as many of you may know, the term creature is a pretty loose concept in the SCP Foundation, as their horrors don't exactly adhere to most of our commonly accepted definitions of the phrase. In the SCP Foundation, there are several object classes used to attempt to define just exactly what is what and how dangerous or useful they may be. These are safe, which is pretty self-explanatory, Euclid, which is something that is pretty damn difficult to contain but can be, and then there's Keter, which essentially means that people are going to get eaten. And then Thormeal, which could be pretty useful depending on your perspective, but whatever, we won't be using that one. Thankfully for us, the SCP Foundation has a useful little litmus test for us to discern what is what. If you can lock it in a box, leave it alone, and nothing bad will happen, then it's probably safe. If you lock it in a box, leave it alone, and you're not entirely sure what will happen, then it's probably Euclid. If you lock it in a box, leave it alone, and it easily escapes, then it's probably Keter. And finally, if it is the box, then it's probably Thormeal. Now, as you may imagine, pretty much all of the Foundation creatures we'll be focusing on are Keter. And yeah, people are going to be eaten. Probably the most likely candidate for the most evil and destructive award is a creature known as SCP-682, the hard to destroy reptile. And by hard to destroy, we mean impossible, as in no matter what level or degree of pain and punishment inflicted upon this creature, whether you boil its skin off with acid and then break apart its bones with a form of liquid concrete, it still refuses to die. And not only does it refuse, but it adapts, permanently augmenting its immunity to whatever eye-watering destruction you could ever envision. Oh, and also, it hates everyone and everything and all life in the universe. Now, I'm not saying that those things always go hand in hand, but hey, we've got to admit the pattern seems suspicious. The thing is, we wouldn't exactly be hard-pressed to find some kind of tentative working solution with SCP-682 having free reign of the planet, because in all likelihood, following its release, it would cause a boatload of destruction in one area, say California, but then once it's defeated every military procedure that can be thrown at it, it'd just chill and sleep in its spot until it wants to move again, and it'd be like living with an immortal dragon on the planet, something like Smaug, and we just have to tiptoe around it, just like dwarves. 682 would be bad, but yeah, it could be worse. So what's worse than that? Well, there's SCP-096, aka the Shy Guy, and if he was ever set loose, anyone who ever caught a glimpse of him would be toast. And in our current day and age of rapid information sharing, where everyone carries a camera in their pocket, the risk of him sprinting around the planet like a hungry hippo and consuming the entire population of the planet is pretty damn high. There's SCP-106, who admittedly could probably be dealt with pretty damn easily in the long run, but for the numerous unfortunate victims that would suffer under its terrifying mechanics, it is probably best that we keep that one locked up for all of eternity, even if it can sludge its way through walls. Gross. You see, the point is the SCP Foundation has done a pretty stand-up job in ensuring that these horrifying anomalous creatures never see the light of day. But if this hypothetical question was ever to be answered, the long and short of it is that we'd be utterly screwed if even a handful of them were ever set loose. The thing is though, as the old saying goes, there is always a bigger fish, and there are far more terrifying creatures that aren't under the Foundation's containment that would be much worse for everyone involved. Take the Scarlet King, for example, perhaps the most powerful anomalous entity in the SCP universe, who is essentially the prime evil in the fabric of existence, and whose sole purpose is to usher forward an eternal darkness of tentacular pain and misery. We should not ever let him loose, nor could we in the first place, because we couldn't ever contain him. If that's the case, maybe we should flip this whole hypothetical scenario on its head and start figuring out how we could train all of these SCP Foundation creatures instead, in some kind of effort to convince them into fighting for us against the origin of all evil, because let's face it, we'd be screwed either way, so we may as well just go down swinging. Hey, I think there's probably a lesson there. Well, there we have it, guys, our long and short answer to the question, what SCP Foundation creatures should we never let loose? Pretty much all of them, but it doesn't really matter because the Scarlet King will consume us all eventually, so what the hell? The sun, the giver of all life, the bright burning orb in the sky, and the one cosmic creation that all life in this galaxy owes its existence to. It pretty much goes without saying that without the sun, life on Earth and the rest of our solar system would be a dark, damp, and downright dismal place, and so we should be thankful of the warm, life-giving embrace that it currently graces us with. But have you ever thought about what would happen if, say, the sun turned against us? And not in the solar flare, end of the world in a single moment kind of deal, but instead slow and incredibly painful. Well, thankfully for us, the SCP Foundation just so happens to have such an event in their horrifying archives. So in that case, let's take a look. As today we curiously ask the question, what if SCP-001, When Day Breaks, was real? Roll the clip. Yeah, if only you could solve this problem by pouring 2 canteens of water over yourself, maybe then we'd be in for a fighting chance. Thankfully for us though, that horrifying solar depiction is resigned to the fictional planet of Crematoria, and of course, for the curious amongst you, that scene was from 2004's The Chronicles of Riddick, starring Vin Diesel as the titular Riddick, a man who would certainly try his best at surviving the fictional outlines of SCP-001 When Day Breaks, but who would sadly, well, I guess you'll find out. But trust me, even Riddick isn't safe. And now that we're rearing our head back toward the fictional SCP Foundation, an organization which hosts some of the most horrifying hypothetical anomalies imaginable, it's probably best that we do what we do best and outline just exactly what we're dealing with. As the record states, SCP-001 is the designation given to the Sun, our Sun, after an event that occurred during a non-disclosed time and date. The event in question resulted in 6.8 billion casualties within the first 24 hours, and if that sounds like pretty much the entire population of the planet, well, it is. Near enough, anyway. You see, during the events of SCP-001, a visual spectrum effect appeared to take place, where upon contact with any visible light produced by the Sun, living organisms literally liquefine at the point of contact, with the effect spreading until the entire organism is converted. Visually, this effect is highly reminiscent of melting wax, and the time it takes for this effect to complete is largely dependent on the level of exposure and the size of the organism. However, and this is an incredibly large however, despite this biomechanical restructuring, at no point do the living organisms perish, and upon completion of the SCP-001 process, these organisms take on an almost gelatinous consistency. Essentially, all flora and fauna on our planet, plant life, birds, human beings, giraffes, sloths, ladybirds, your next door neighbor, your president or your prime minister, all of them upon contact with any sunlight gets turned into an amorphous lump of biomass. And not only that, because yes, it does indeed get worse, they continue on with their preordained lives and try and orient themselves in a fashion reminiscent of their previous form, obviously to varying degrees of success. Flora typically remain physically inert, yet are still capable of photosynthesis, and more importantly, they still produce oxygen. It's business as usual, except everyone and everything are a giant ball of jelly. Organisms that are capable of flight lose the capability to do so. All fauna remain sentient, and so they display behavior that parallels their non-anomalous counterparts when not absorbed into a collective instance. We'll get onto that in a moment. Most importantly though, humans, as in you and I, retain a modicum of sapience and memory following the events of SCP-001. Lucky us. And whilst that may sound like the saving grace of an otherwise terrifying hypothetical scenario, it really isn't. In fact, it is the worst thing that could possibly happen, because not only are we a jiggling biomass of flesh and other such matter writhing around on the ground of a brand new sun-baked planet, we're also alive and conscious to witness the whole thing happening for all eternity. As you may imagine, there is no going back once you've literally been melted by the anomalous solar properties of SCP-001. But wait, because if you think that's already the worst possible outcome of such a hypothetical event, deep breath. It gets worse. You see, due to their composition, any instance of those affected by SCP-001, which from then on are designated as SCP-001-A, that then make contact with one another, be it any life form under the same effects, eventually combine and blend at a molecular level. Now, this does not seem to cause any pain or distress to the amorphous humanoid mass, but, well, as you may imagine, it's pretty damn disgusting. Not only that, but as you may also imagine, given the fact that there are over 7 billion people on this planet, if under the given circumstances all of them were to suddenly pool into a ball of human flesh jelly, the results would be pretty deep, I guess is the word. As the record goes on to elaborate, the resulting biomass is amorphous and chaotic. The component organisms will shift between a full to semi-liquid state. Limbs and bodies will rise periodically from within the mass for a short duration before deteriorating and being consumed by another life form. Collective instances will locomote by using their appendages in tandem to carry their mass. Larger instances will then form a sort of pseudopod from their constituent life forms, dragging themselves about in a manner similar to an amoeba. Yeah, you heard it correctly. This is a hard reset back to the origin of all life, back to the primordial soup swimming around, or in this case, crawling as the basest of all possible life. And all of that is thanks to our Sun. Not in this case the giver of all life, but instead the resetter, I guess. I mean, the hypothetical implications of this terrifying notion are pretty self-explanatory, and the confines of SCP-001 are rather clear. Pretty much every human being at one point on a very clear and definite timescale would be affected by this gellifying sunlight, and even if they didn't, eventually the jellified amorphous mass would catch up with the few survivors. But who would those survivors be? What would their chances be to evade the eventual biomass of the planet's population? Well, if you're thinking, I'm in a dark room, I've been playing Stardew Valley all day, there's no chance that I'll be affected by the sunlight in this darkened bedroom, and I don't plan on going outside anytime soon. I'm afraid to break it to you, but you're done for too. How many people live in your city? A few million? Yeah, the vast majority of them are now an amorphous ball of flesh that will eventually get to you, considering the fact that they cover quite a lot of, well, surface area. Okay, what if you don't live in a city? What if you live in a small rural town with only a few thousand people? Yeah, okay, you're probably going to stand a little bit more of a chance in the immediate fallout of the SCP-001 event, but unless you're living in some remote location like Barrow, Alaska, then you're also pretty much done for. And in that instance, anywhere above the 60th parallel will probably be the worst place you could even imagine to be, given the fact that during the summer months, Barrow, Alaska and other such towns have consistent, constant sunlight. Perhaps the likeliest long-term survivors would be those caught in extreme situations deep underground or hidden within the bowels of the planet. Spelunkers who at the time of the event found themselves in a massive cavern system that had no chance of penetration via sunlight. Yeah, they're more than likely going to perish at some point, but hey, at least they'd have a fighting chance. Sewer or underground maintenance workers would find themselves in a similar kind of boat, and well, you know, anyone who finds themselves in a secret nuclear bunker, but they're already in the business of surviving pretty much anything anyway. So let them get on with it. Yeah, I think it goes without saying, it certainly wouldn't be a pretty sight, and for 99.99% of the population, it would be the ultimate end of the world in an eternal apocalypse of fleshy soup writhing around the planet until eventually the entire population of our species, as well as every single living creature on Earth, were one giant fleshy mass. Yeah, let's be thankful that it's fictional. Cold-blooded troglodyte cave creatures made from blood with an insatiable hunger for human flesh. Ah, everyone's favourite topic, right? The thing is, it's been a while since we turned our gaze toward that horrifying and terrible place known only as the SCP Foundation and the many horrors and horrific anomalous entities that lurk within its tentative global containment. Now, whilst the SCP Foundation harbours some individually monolithic monstrosities, perhaps the most vile and hypothetically devastating of these aren't just a single entity, but an entire species worth, with many voices. SCP-939, and in this hypothetical scenario, they've escaped. As today we curiously ask the question, what if SCP-939 escaped? Roll the clip. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Terrifying, isn't it? But truth be told, that's actually a startlingly accurate representation of what these nightmarish creatures could potentially do, given the parameters of this hypothetical Life's Biggest Question. For the curious amongst you, of course, that scene was from the awesome 2018 movie Annihilation, directed by Alex Garland, based upon the awesome novel of the same name by Jeff Vandermeer. And yeah, it's a pretty fitting cinematic depiction to set the scene, and again, I'm sorry for terrifying you, because it is terrifying. Anyway, on with the show. Before we jump into the parameters of this hypothetical containment breach, it's probably best that we outline just exactly what we're dealing with, and if you're so inclined, now would probably be high time to check out our previous SCP-939 LBQ, where we delve into detail about the inner workings of these pack-based predators. But for those of you that aren't so inclined, let's take a quick look. As the record states, SCP-939 are a species of endothermic pack-based predators which display an atrophy of various systems similar to that of troglodytic organisms. Essentially, if that sounds a little wordy, in other terms, they're ugly as all hell and are really good at living in the dark and then not dying. Essentially, they're an anomalous species of creature that are covered in sensitive organ-like appendages and spines. Their skin is colored red due to a unique sequence of chemicals that they're essentially comprised of that visually mimics hemoglobin. Blood. But that's it really, because the first visual hurdle we have to get over is the fact that despite being comprised entirely of a blood-like substance, the species of SCP-939 possess zero vital organ systems. Both its central and peripheral nervous systems, its circulatory systems, and its entire digestive tract are all terrifyingly absent. And that's just the first vessel of horror for SCP-939, because despite being a species whose sole existence revolves around consuming flesh, they have no way to even digest their prey. In fact, once they feast, they just end up vomiting it back out, and yeah, you get the picture. It doesn't end there though, because SCP-939 have two unique functions that are going to make the events of this hypothetical containment breach even more horrifying. We'll start with the less terrifying instance of the two. You see, SCP-939 exhale minute traces of an aerosolized amnestic substance referred to by the Foundation as AMN-C227. This substance causes temporary anterograde amnesia that is colorless, odorless, tasteless, and seems to have an innate function that causes anyone affected by it to make their way toward the dens of SCP-939, where they'll be ravenously consumed and torn to shreds. Wait, Hold on a minute, did we just say dens? Yeah, because it leads us to our second unique function, the form in which this terrifying species reproduces. Now, typically female SCP-939 give birth to litters of 12, but they don't give birth to similar blood-based pack wolves as they appear in their adult forms. No, they give birth to human infants that once they become juvenile, rip off their own skin, tear off their own heads, and then eat them as their new SCP-939 forms. Yeah. And if we're outlining the parameters of an SCP-939 containment breach, it would be at the hands of these terrifying toddlers. The thing is though, truth be told, although there are many instances of this species under the current containment of the Foundation, it is thought that the vast majority of SCP-939 already live out in the wild, their numbers completely undocumented. In remote portions of the planet, there could already potentially be thousands of these creatures thriving and surviving, employing their anomalous predatory instances to feast on their prey. If that was the case, the means in which SCP-939 escaped would suggest that they've been living amongst us alongside our civilization for an untold amount of time, potentially for thousands of years. And if I'm being honest, that's far more terrifying than these things breaking out of an anomalous box after being locked inside a Foundation containment cell. Picture this, an event that has already been documented in the records of SCP-939, but a similar occurrence that would likely play out under the confines of this hypothetical scenario. You're out on a camping trip with your friends, you're having fun, you're drinking a few beers, but then suddenly you get a familiar feeling. It's odd, you feel like you've been here before, but when you voice that same strange feeling to your group of friends, they feel it too. It grips you and you can't ignore it, and that strange feeling leads you out from the camp and your friends then follow. It's like deja vu, but not quite. You go deeper into the forest and you come to a cave, and now the feeling is far more intense than before, but when you step inside and you go deeper, you hear a sound. It's like a baby crying, and then nothing. Blank. Suddenly, the next thing you remember, you wake up on the side of the road, covered in blood, and your friends are nowhere to be seen. Also, the police are there and dozens of ambulances. They're trying to get a statement from you, but you can't remember anything after going inside the cave, no matter how hard you try. Little do you know, though, you've been under the effects of AMN C227, and you and your friends were lured into the cave by a pack of SCP-939 to be eaten. You were the lucky one. You survived, and now picture that event playing out continuously, potentially across the entire planet. Yeah, it's frighteningly efficient, isn't it? Under this hypothetical scenario, the real horror wouldn't be SCP-939 escaping from the Foundation's containment. It would be trying to picture how many were already out there waiting to eat us all. Yeah, I think I'll pass on this one. Well, there we have it, our roundabout way of detailing just how terrifying SCP-939 already are, and that's without trying to picture an entire species of them already out in the wild. Amusement parks, the place that dreams are made of, right? Well, okay, maybe not quite, but it's all good fun regardless. Now, it goes without saying, but it takes quite a stony heart not to leap in joy at the thought of spending the day running around a purpose-built funland filled to the brim with thrilling attractions, roller coasters, log flumes, teacups, you know how it goes. Whether it's Disneyland, Six Flags, Canada's Wonderland, Ocean Park, or Alton Towers, the point is theme parks the world over have held a special place in our hearts as relentlessly curated moments of manufactured joy. But when we take a look at that terrifying place known only as the SCP Foundation, there exists a far more anomalous version of events. So, let's take a look at them, shall we? As today we curiously ask the question, what if SCP-949 was real? Wondertainment Land. A theme park would be the worst place for anyone to ever head to during a zombie apocalypse. Come on guys, that's just basic knowledge, right? However, don't you worry yourselves about that, because Wondertainment Land certainly wouldn't have any zombies around for us to be concerned about. Nope. Not at all. No zombies anywhere. Anyway, as is the case with our myriad of other SCP imagination disseminations, for us to first speculate on the hypothetical existentation of SCP-949, we should probably first figure out what it's all about. As the record states, SCP-949 is a large amusement park located in an undisclosed state of the USA, which, according to the entrance gate, as well as several documents within the park, is designated as Wondertainment Land. On multiple occasions, SCP-949 has been observed to periodically disappear from its location, often reappearing several days later with brand new facilities for audiences to enjoy. However, and this is certainly a very important however, facilities found inside SCP-949 appear to demonstrate highly anomalous properties. And if you were expecting something different, well, you see what happens the next time you try and underestimate the SCP Foundation, because you'll most certainly regret it. Strangely enough though, these anomalous facilities do not appear to intentionally cause any harm to humans, and so far no casualties have occurred during the exploration of SCP-949. Yet, anyway. Great news, right? These facilities include Hucker Duck, an attraction that contains several animated duck toys where the subject must retrieve them from a central pool area with a hook, in the classic fashion. However, these duck toys demonstrate panic and pain when hooked, but I'm sure it's just all part of the attraction, right? Then there's the Spooky Manor, a haunted house attraction that after travelling through it, subjects find themselves with several limbs and human heads attached to their own that appear to give information on the rest of the park. There's the Random River Rapids, an otherwise standard river rapids ride that appears to harbour a series of strange sea creatures within its waters. And then there's the bumper cars, again pretty standard fare, only in this version the bumper cars are sentient and they want to eat each other. Interesting design choice. So what's it all about? You see, on the surface, Wondertainment Land appears to be some form of mid-tier amusement park staffed by costumed mascots made entirely out of woolen flesh that just so happens to disappear every now and then from between time and space, just with some marginally more impressive attractions to deliver to the public. Big deal, right? If it was real, then it'd just be a strange roadside theme park that an unfortunate vacationing family may find themselves driving up to after taking the wrong directions before being picked up by the patrolling SCP Foundation staff and then administered with amnestics and then sent on their merry little way. They wouldn't ever realise they've been there, and hey, given the fact that its attractions aren't exactly the most thrilling, that also could be the case regardless of amnestics. But there's a certain name given to this particular anomalous entity that potentially poses a far more pernicious set of circumstances, given the parameters that it was real. Wondertainment Land is supposedly owned under the auspices of an organisation known as Dr. Wondertainment, a mysterious name that often appears throughout the canon of the SCP Foundation as an alleged reference to an anonymous entity, the identity of which is completely unknown. Now, the mysteries of Dr. Wondertainment are many, and their allusions appear in a wide number of other SCP entries, regularly posing the question as to whether it is either an individual or a corporate entity. But one thing remains the same: they are responsible for the creation of some of the most intriguing anomalous objects and entities in the entire SCP Foundation canon, and this SCP-949 is their most expansive endeavour. Picture them as the equivalent to Willy Wonka and his chocolate factory, although instead of Willy Wonka, it's potentially some robotic overlord, and instead of a chocolate factory, it's an entity that gives life to anomalous teddy bears, where it uses SCP-949 as the place that it figures out whether they'll explode in people's faces or not. In their capitalist containment catalogue, there's the Little Mister collection, a set of 20 individual animated products that behave like humans but instead exhibit anomalous properties. There's Dr. Wondertainment's Infinite Fun Book, which the less you know about, the better. There's Dr. Wondertainment's Bubble Bath Bonbons, not as fun as they sound, but it poses the question: could a mysterious corporation that focuses on the creation of these incredibly dangerous, anomalous objects ever create a successful theme park? Do you know the kind of logistics involved in maintaining a highly functioning amusement park? The fiscal responsibilities alone are staggering. The average successful theme park spends around $10 million a year constantly adding rides, shows, restaurants, shops and hotels to the ever-expanding park just to keep up with the competition. And this doesn't even include the ongoing maintenance required for the park's existing lineup, with new attractions costing anywhere in the ballpark of $100 million. Heck, Tokyo Disney announced in 2014 that it would spend an average of $500 million a year for 9 consecutive years just to stay afloat. And we haven't even addressed the fact that if you ever remotely hope to operate a successful theme park, you're talking hotels, you're talking state-of-the-art infrastructure, you're talking hundreds of millions of people visiting your attractions every year. That is not an easy feat, even by anomalous means. I mean, I'm not entirely sure of the fiscal veracity of the Dr. Wondertainment organisation, but considering the current lineup at their park, it doesn't exactly constitute them splashing the cash, and if anything, they're pretty bare bones actually. Yeah, alright, you might have the most mind-bending anomalous constructions at your disposal, but unless you've got the footfall to keep your park afloat, I'm not convinced that Wondertainment Land would even manage to keep its gates open. After all, an animal cruelty-inspired Hucker Duck doesn't exactly inspire joy. So yeah, if SCP-949, aka Wondertainment Land, was real, I doubt that it'd ever have the means to keep itself afloat as a successful business enterprise. Sorry, Dr. Wondertainment Land, and it's for that reason that I'm out. And there we have it, the long and short answer to what if SCP-949 was real. If it was, I certainly wouldn't recommend investment. What's that in the distance? Oh no, Is it a giant corporeal entity wielding a flaming sword of righteousness and apocalyptic energy, or is it an anomalous monolithic sea serpent that spans the length of an entire ocean that presumably could wrap itself around this fair planet that we call home just for the sake of it? Or is it both of them, locked in an eternal battle to see just exactly who or what can take down the giant eel of doom and become the undisputed titan of life's biggest questions, and once and for all become the ultimate victor of this continued hypothetical campaign of chaos? Well, yeah. It's exactly that, actually, so let's find out what kind of destruction would be fraught should they ever get into a metaphorical fistfight. Today, we curiously ask the question, what if SCP-3000 fought the Gate Guardian? Roll the clip.
Night. Dark things from the sea's depths.
For the curious amongst you, of course, that scene was from 2007's Beowulf, starring the one and only Ray Winston as the mightiest warrior of the Age of Heroes himself, depicting the legendary tale of Beowulf and the many monsters that he has slain, Grendel and his mother included. And if we're being honest, that's probably the closest that we'll ever get to visually describing one of the many ways that this hypothetical battle would or could go down. Just instead of Beowulf measuring in at around 6 foot, imagine him being much taller, like several buildings tall, and also he'd be covered in all-consuming heavenly flames, and he'd also wield a massive sword actually that burns hotter than the sun. Yeah. We should probably explain. You see, as is the case in these continued hypothetical battles, describing the features of these particular entities is one of our first ports of call when heading into the nitty-gritty. You see, it makes all the difference to know what kind of anomalous instances are lurking within their arsenal. And now, if you haven't seen or heard of SCP-3000, it probably goes without saying, but you should check out our specific Life's Biggest Questions breakdown on the inner workings of this anomalous entity. But for the uninitiated amongst you, well, we'll give a brief overview to set the scene. As the record states, SCP-3000 is a massive aquatic serpentine entity strongly resembling that of a giant moray eel that is exclusively found lingering at the bottom of the Bay of Bengal off the southeast coast of the Indian subcontinent. As you may imagine, down to its impossibly large size, it is hypothesized that SCP-3000 measures anywhere between 600 and 900 kilometers in length, and well, if you just so happen to be a cartographer, you know that that covers pretty much the entire length of the Indian subcontinental coast. It's big, guys. And given the fact that it's impossibly huge, like most serpentine monsters of legend, it is also carnivorous, where it regularly feasts upon unassuming Foundation researchers and any scuba divers that are unfortunate enough to find themselves paddling in the darkest part of SCP-3000's depths. Here's where things get a little bit interesting, though, and where most other contenders of this giant anomalous eel have been brought to ruin. You see, what sets SCP-3000 apart is that after feasting on human flesh, it excretes a thin layer of a viscous dark grey substance from its skin, known to the Foundation as Y909, which is the primary ingredient in one of the Foundation's most important logistical technologies, amnestics, the aerosol chemical compositional substances that wipes the memory of any given individual, often used to protect them from certain anomalous hazards or, make them forget what they've seen. You see, this anomalous giant eel jelly has the power of influencing its victims at a cerebral level, essentially turning SCP-3000 into an all-powerful, mind-controlling serpent that could probably destroy humanity with the flick of its flipper, if eels had flippers, that is. This factor has pretty much rendered any opponent of SCP-3000 null and void, but wait, because this guy waiting in the wings, which has wings, the subject of Dr. Cleft's proposal, which forms one of the many possibilities of what the coveted SCP-001 could possibly be, is perhaps one of, if not the most powerful entity in the canon of the SCP Foundation, the Gate Guardian. And well, this may be a pretty short battle, actually. As the record states, the Gate Guardian is a humanoid entity measuring at approximately 700 cubits in length, or 320 meters, which is roughly the size of around 10 blue whales, stacked end to end. It possesses a wide number of luminous wing-like appendages that emerge from its shoulders, as well as its back, temples, ankles, and wrists, the amount of which differs per observation, anywhere from 2 to 108. And then perhaps the most important facet of the Gate Guardian is that it is in possession of an object referred to as SCP-001-2, a weapon, possibly a sword or a large knife, that appears to emit flames at a temperature based on spectrographic analysis that rivals that of the sun. You see, any entity that approaches within 1 kilometer of the Gate Guardian is immediately struck by the weapon and obliterated from all existence. So far, any and all hostile actions taken toward the Gate Guardian has so far resulted in the complete and utter annihilation of the attacker at a subatomic level, regardless of range. And yeah, under that assumption, you would assume that SCP-3000 doesn't really stand a chance at all. Poof, gone. Giant 600 kilometer long eel gets vaporized at an atomic level from any location by the sheer destructive power of the anomalous heavens. Friends, game over. Job done. You see, purely from an experimental basis, the SCP Foundation have thrown literally everything at the Gate Guardian in an attempt to figure out just how it worked. They've sent Class D personnel at it in their droves, remotely operated robots and drones, entire arsenals of missiles of the multi-warhead intercontinental ballistic variety, all to no avail. Not even the most powerful of friendly SCP entities, if you could call them that, SCP-076 and SCP-073 included, would dare to go near it. It is impossible, and by that logic, even if somehow SCP-3000 hypothetically slithered down the Euphrates River to combat it, it wouldn't ever get close enough to take a chomp out of it, and so it would be vaporized the very moment it came into its proximity. We've got a new winner. However, there is one anomalous anomaly that remains to be tested that has so far affected the results of our previous SCP-3000 based battles. You see, we have no idea how the Gate Guardian would react to the properties of amnestics, and given the fact that SCP-3000 is the literal source of this mind control power and not just some washed out, distilled, chemically restructured component, then there is a plausible potential of SCP-3000 not yet demonstrating its true anomalous power. Perhaps, given some of these hypothetical play-by-plays in one of these scenarios, instead of getting instantly vaporized, SCP-3000 would manage to affect the mind of the Gate Guardian, and then presumably would have the most powerful entity in the entire SCP Foundation at its disposal. Maybe in that sense, SCP-3000 would be the serpent thought to bring about the end of the world, and with all the biblical references alluded to in the canon of the Gate Guardian, hey, maybe we're just looking at the perfect ingredients for the apocalypse. Uh-oh. Well, there we have it, guys, our long and short answer to the question, what if SCP-3000 fought the Gate Guardian? The Gate Guardian would either destroy it at an atomic level without breaking a sweat, or perhaps, well, it'd bring about the end of the world. What do you guys think? Do you agree, disagree, have any more to add to this SCP-based showdown? Then let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Before we depart from today's video, though, let's first take a quick look at some of your more creative comments from over the past few days. History Call General says, "Who loves Jack's voice? I just love his voice." Aww. Thank you, guy, but when you're of the disembodied floating variety, a voice is, it's all you have, really. So lonely out here.